Something smells a little off with the old mainstream politics, as we've been used to them since the 1990s. In the US, you've got colourful characters like Sarah Palin, Bernie, and now Trump and sidekicks running the show, dominating headlines for the past 10 years. Across Europe, west, east, up, down, left, right, parliaments have filled up with a rainbow salad of new parties. So something clearly isn't quite working, yet every politician advocating for major changes seemingly gets branded populist and tossed in the bin by the mainstream. You've got the US populists, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump. In Europe, you've got Nigel Farage, Viktor Orban, Giorgia Meloni, Marine Le Pen, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Robert Fico, Elise Weidel. In Latin America, you've got Javier Milei, you've got Lula in Brazil, you've got Obrador in Mexico. But why are all these guys called populist? What do Sanders and Trump have in common, for example, or in France, Mélenchon and Marine Le Pen? In many ways, all of these people couldn't be more different. Yet they're all populist. Here comes a hot take. Populist, at this point, is just a vague slur, a bit like fascist or libtard. And that's a problem. It's a problem because the populist bin does contain a lot of crap ideas and actions. Does anybody still remember the great chop of the Amazon under Bolsonaro, or Trump pardoning the January 6th insurrectionists, or Evo Morales in Bolivia trying to be permanent president? But in all this crap, there are also some useful ideas and legit points of discussion. First and foremost, why are these populists so popular? And why are their voters so mad? We should have a closer look at populists, discard the batshit insane parts, see what makes sense, and try to incorporate that into mainstream politics. Now, first of all, what is a populist? It's usually some combination of, number one, likes talking about us versus them, the people versus the elites, or the Zionist cabal, or the Davos Forum, natives versus immigrants, this country versus that other country. 2. Prefers vibes and speeches to solving actual problems. For example, Trump jacking up tariffs to make the cost of living great again, or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela nationalizing everything and crashing food production by 75% in the country. Number 3. Hates globalization. Number 4. Doesn't like democracy. Number 5. Doesn't like capitalism. Now, some populists fit all these criteria, but many actually don't, and they're usually categorized as either left-wing or right-wing. But what does that even mean? Case in point, Viktor Orban of Hungary. He's a very right-wing guy in the sense that he is conservative in the culture war stuff, very anti-gay, anti-immigrant, anti-this and that. But in many ways, he's very left. He's pro-state, for example, on economy, and stands for windfall taxes, the welfare state, state intervention. Now, right-wing populists are typically all authoritarian, usually culturally conservative and against redistribution, and quite isolationist. Left-wing populists, on the other hand, are usually culturally progressive, pro-redistribution and welfare, and usually internationalist and democratic. But notice this word usually. Not that many things united the left-wing populists, for example, and there are so many exceptions to this left-right divide that it's kind of useless. I think we need a better way to think about all of this, so I spent over 400 hours trawling Wikipedia to analyze the political positions of a gaggle of 13 populists. I looked at what they stand for when it comes to their style of rule, democratic versus autocratic, the economy, free markets versus interventionism, cultural attitudes, conservative versus liberal, and foreign policy, isolationist versus multilateralist. I then spent a further 200 hours in PowerPoint to bring you these political maps. Absolutely beautiful. So what do they really tell us? They tell us that both left and right-wing populists agree on multiple things. And some of these things, at least, seem worth discussing. Because beyond all the anger and the rah-rah anti-establishment stuff, there are some legitimate points of discussion. Populists are not fans of immigration, they're suspicious of free trade and globalism, and they advocate for the working class and better welfare. This is an unusual constellation of beliefs, and it warrants a closer look. Now, I'm not saying these are good ideas, but at the very least they're not batshit insane, and so we should probably try to understand where they come from. Now, fortunately for us, many people have already investigated the causes of populism. The first reason is economic insecurity. There's a general sense that life just keeps getting worse over time. Maybe that's because of the stagnating wages for the bottom 50% in the US. And it also feels like we're always just 2 steps away from poverty. You might lose your job because of technological changes and then go from a well-paid technician to a part-time sales assistant, making minimum wage and forever juggling jobs to make ends meet. This makes people fear the future and makes them worried that their kids will be worse off. Now, people doing well in the current society often seem to ignore these issues. Because after all, yesterday's luxuries are now commodities. Holidays abroad, smartphones, VR headsets, everybody can afford that. And look at the economic growth, 3% last year, and the historically low unemployment rate. Things are better than ever, so why all this moaning and groaning? But reality likes to hide behind averages. Yes, yesterday's luxuries are cheap essentials now, but essentials are now luxuries. Housing, good education, transport, that's all become very expensive. And yes, the economic growth is there, kind of, but flows to the upper classes for the most part. And yes, low unemployment is great, but many jobs, let's be honest, are crap. The salaries are low, the progression opportunities are worse than they used to be, there's little job security, and there's very little support for the long-term unemployed who often don't even show up in unemployment figures. All these problems make people justifiably mad. And they feed into the second reason, which is the rise of new values and groups of people. Organized religion, family values, that's all in decline. And more immigrants with different habits and attitudes now live in the developed world. People, especially the older generation, may feel a bit alienated from this new society. What's with all these edgy atheists and families with 2 dads and my gender-ambiguous niece? Now, combined with the economic insecurity, they might feel a bit like second-class citizens, which causes resentment, which then gets directed at foreigners for stealing our jobs, immigrants for pricing me out of my house, liberals and their weird gay families, and elites putting chips in your brain to try to control your mind. The third reason is that politics is not as responsive to voters as in the past. In the US, for example, working-class candidates are vastly underrepresented in politics, presumably because of issues raising enough funds to run and having enough time to run. Furthermore, policy-making staffers often seem to be out of touch with constituents on key issues, such as the minimum wage or the gun sales checks, apparently because of spending too much time with interest groups. So this is the sequence of reasons behind populism. Economic anxiety feeds cultural anxiety, which then feeds anger at immigrants, foreigners, and elites. And the politicians don't really seem to listen, meanwhile, making voters even angrier. And I think there is another, fourth reason. Populists on social media pouring kerosene on the situation. Most populists offer only knee-jerk solutions. Chuck out the foreigners, shut down all the trade. But they sound so good. Perfect for Twitter engagement. The more outrageous the idea, the faster it spreads. Immigrants eating cats. Let's invade Canada. Let's defund the police. The Jews orchestrating the replacement of the white man. The result is a vicious circle of rage that sucks up all the attention. We need to slow down, drop the blame game, and have a proper look at the problems fueling populism. Let's start talking about solutions. So how do we fix politics then? Whether you're a budding politician or a veteran, an activist, or just an engaged voter, and you want to build better politics, here's what you need to do. Number 1, better messaging. We need to avoid the blame game. The scheming rich, the Jews, the foreigners, the this, the other. And we need to unite across common values instead. Let's say your goal is to reduce inequality. If you're British, you can appeal to fairness and good sportsmanship. So the message should be something like, the economy should work for everybody. If you're an American, then it's all about freedom, isn't it? So the message should then be, voters should be free from dire poverty. The second ingredient is to keep it positive. Give people hope, but hope that is grounded in reality. If talking about housing, we can talk about, for example, simplifying the building regulations and making the government invest in social housing. These are all realistic policies that could give our kids a better future. Populists often only peddle doom and gloom, and voters eventually get tired of it. Keeping the message positive gives us a better chance of winning them over. The third ingredient of better messaging is to just keep it simple and repeat. Compare these two statements. Over a period of 4 years, we aim to increase the marginal income tax rate to 55%, along with an increase in corporate tax rate to 35%. We furthermore aim to equalize the latter with the marginal capital gains tax rate and increase personal allowance to £20,000. Compare this to, those with bigger shoulders should carry more burden. We will change the tax system to make that happen. Now this is easier to remember, isn't it? We can always go into more detail if needed, and we need to be prepared to answer complicated questions. But in casual conversation, we should keep our message simple. Number 2, reconnecting with voters. I've already spoken about how surprisingly out of touch policymakers can be. But how does this happen in the first place? Mainstream parties just seem to have become more rigid and managerial, and it's presumably because all rely more on middle and upper class voters than in past decades. And if office drones like me are the bulk of your voters, then your party is more likely to look and feel like an office. There's less grassroots politics than before. There are fewer village hall meetings, less knocking on doors, less support for activists. This is a shame. But it can be reversed. We just need to involve more people who care, and we need to pressure political representatives for more face time. Number 3, good policies. We shouldn't get too in love with policy ideas and instead focus on solving problems. Some that I can see are inequality, the poor integration of immigrants, especially in Europe, the closed doors political decision making, the overrepresentation of the rich in politics, state bureaucracies often being both too big and too weak. But there are many more, obviously. So let's zoom in a little bit and talk about the political solutions to inequality for a second. You know that I'm a bit partial to wealth taxes, to be perfectly honest, but these are just part of the bigger solution to inequality. What we need most likely is a comprehensive tax reform in which income, corporate and other taxes are brought closer together in rate, in addition to coordinating tax policy across borders. But really, I'd take anything, almost any policy solution that works. Now, the other problems that I listed also have plausible existing policy solutions that we all should discuss as a society. The poor integration of immigrants in Europe, for example. We could fix it with more language courses, buddy schemes, easier access to jobs that facilitate real-life interactions. The closed-door politics in the EU could be solved by reforming the EU institutions to make the Council of Europe release more information. And if we're talking about the rich being overrepresented in politics, then we need more grassroots activism and potentially more public financial support for campaigning. Finally, if the government institutions are both too big and too weak, we should streamline, not scrap, streamline regulations so that public servants can actually do stuff and not waste time filling forms. Also, we should give them a pass for honest mistakes. Being scared shitless of media hounding and litigation means they'd rather do nothing than take a shot at fixing something if it carries the slightest risk. This is not productive for society. So, in short, how do we go beyond populism and start fixing politics? First of all, we need better political messaging. Messaging that is simple, positive, but realistic, and that unites us. We then need to do more activism, more door knocking, more community engagement. Finally, we need to openly and calmly start discussing problems such as inequality, the crumbling institutions, etc., as well as start discussing and testing solutions for these problems. This, of course, will require trial and error, and it's not going to happen overnight. So we need to be patient and persistent, but we can do it. There's nothing impossible about what I've just described. Okay, it's time to wrap things up, boys and girls. Now, I started this video moaning about the term populist and how it's become overused and almost a slur like Nazi or libtard. And that's a problem because when people hear the word populist, they immediately stick their heads in the sand and do their best to ignore what these populists have to say. This is an issue because while populists are frequently pretty unhinged, let's be real, they do raise some legit points. They reflect what their voters feel, and their voters are afraid of the future and falling behind, and they feel ignored by the government. And this stuff is not all made up, it's often for justifiable reasons. However, we can make politics sane again, but we need to get better at communicating, we need to get better at getting connected to voters again, we need to start admitting the problems in our societies honestly, and most of all, we need to start testing solutions for these problems rather than simply running our countries on autopilot, which has been going on since at least 2008, it feels to me. We can do better than that, and we should. And if you like this production, subscribe and tune in for more in the future.